Hello and welcome to my channel. Thanks for joining me today. My name is Jenny and I'm the founder and creator of JennyCardDesigns. My YouTube channel contains content that is intended to share paper crafting, tutorials, and inspiration with all of you. I hope that you enjoy. I've got a super fun project for you today using some really fun neon inks and a turnabout stamp. So I'll be using the Rina Designs Electro Pop ink, and I have these beautiful neon colors. We'll get to the colors in a few moments. The stamp set I'm using is a Concord 9th turnabout stamp called Cool Treats, and it's a super fun stamp where when you stamp it 4 times and turn it as you stamp, you get this really cool looking pattern. So if you haven't used turnabout stamps before, stay tuned to this video and I'll show you how to use them. If you are familiar with turnabout stamps, this should be fairly simple for you. Okay, so let's start with grabbing the Concord 9th turnabout jig. Now you don't necessarily need the jig, but if you've watched any of my previous videos, I have struggled sometimes with turnabout stamps, sort of not getting them lined up properly. So I think this is a really helpful tool in making sure that it gets together properly. First of all, I've got my Misti and I've got the turnabout jig, and I just put a little bit of repositionable tape on my turnabout jig, and then I'm going to grab this little acetate sheet that came with the stamp, and on the sheet it says this side up. So you want to make sure that that's the side that you'll be using, and there is a etched in X on the turnabout jig, so we're going to line up this acetate sheet along the etched in X. So we want to make sure it's perfectly aligned and that X lands dead center of our turnabout jig. Okay, looks good. Now I'm going to grab the turnabout stamp and I'm going to carefully peel the stamp off of the carrier sheet, making sure not to stretch it. And then I'm going to take the stamp and I'm going to lay it face down. So the back of the stamp is facing me and the stamp where the images will stamp are touching the acetate sheet. And I'll start in one corner and I'll slowly start to line up each of the pieces, making sure that each image lands over top of its partner and you can see the black images through the photopolymer stamp. So this is a very easy stamp to line up. I just go back and double check that, sometimes you have to move things around because the photopolymer can get stretched or sort of like shriveled a little bit. So just kind of pull it where you need to and move it around and make sure that all of those spots are covered and each of the images land right over top of its mirror counterpart. Okay, and it looks good. Now I'm going to take this turnabout jig with the stamp and I'm going to put it inside of my Misti. Now this is the original size Misti. This turnabout stamp will not work in the smaller mini Misti, just a little heads up there. So it's very important that you make sure that you choose a corner to work with. So either the top corner or the bottom corner. So I want to make sure that I position my jig in the bottom right hand corner of my Misti, and I'll get it picked up with the door. I'm going to take my turnabout jig and I'll place that back down in the corner. I'll take the acetate sheet and I'll put that away, and I'm going to prep my stamp. Because I haven't used this before, I like to make sure that all of the manufacturing residue is off of the stamp so I get a nice crisp stamp image. Okay, we're going to set this aside for a moment and I'm going to go cut a piece of cardstock. I've got just a piece of Rina Classic Crest Solar White cardstock and I'm going to cut it down to 6 inches by 6 inches. So this will be a perfectly square panel to do my stamping. And then I'm going to grab the Misti. Now I will take my turnabout jig and I will place my 6 by 6 cardstock right over top of the jig, so that it's even and it's right in the center of the jig and it doesn't stick out at all and it's perfectly centered. And then making sure that my cardstock is pressed into that bottom right hand corner. My stamp has no air bubbles and it's ready to go. Let's start with that Rina Electro Pop ink, and this is the Orange Glow. I'll get my stamp inked up nice and good and I will press my image into my paper and making sure I get a good transfer of ink, open up the door, and we have our first pattern. Now it doesn't look like much, but we're going to pick up the paper and rotate it one turn to the left, reposition it back into the corner. I use my magnet to help pin it down, and I'll take the Electro Poppin' Pink ink, and I will ink up this stamp nice and good, close the door of my Misti, and press, and making sure that I get good contact and giving a second for that ink to transfer. And there we go. And we'll continue doing the same thing. I'm going to pick up my sheet, rotate it one turn to the left, and I'll make sure my stamp is cleaned off. And now I've got Electro Pop Screamin' Green. I'll stamp that. Okay, looks good. One more turn to the left, and for the final color, I will use Blaring Blue. I really like this color combo. It's really vibrant. Okay, I'm going to get my stamp inked up nice and good. Close the door of the Misti and press, and voila. We have this beautiful Electro Poppin' ice cream background. I love it. It's so cute. And it worked out perfectly, which I was super happy about. This was the first time I used this stamp, and this is the first background I made, and it turned out perfect. So now I'm going to cut this in half. So I'm going to chop that down because I'd like to create a slimline card with this panel, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So I'm going to cut this right in half, and I have my measurements are going to be just a little over 2.5 by 5. And now I'm going to take a heavy base weight cardstock, and I'm going to cut that down to 8.5 inches by 7. And then I'm going to take it to my scoreboard, and along the 7-inch side, I'm going to score at 3.5, and thus creating my slimline card. Now I'm going to take my ice cream panels, and I'm going to get those adhered in the center of my slimline panel. And I want that pattern to go edge to edge. So I'll get that adhered, and then I will take my scissors and trim off the excess off the side, and I'll save that piece for another project. Okay, now one of my favorite things to do with bright colors of ink on white cards is to add a strip of black. I like a little pop of black with bright colors, and I think it makes it sort of stand out even that much more. So I've got a few strips of black cardstock that I'm going to adhere down to sort of create a frame around my popsicle background. I think I called it ice cream earlier. I think it's a bit of both. It's a bit of ice cream, it's a bit of popsicle, it's a bit of sprinkles. It's so fun. I love it so much. I'm going to run a strip of adhesive across my panel and add my black cardstock, and I like the way that looks. And now there is a little bit of a transition between my two pieces. So I like this little line stamp image in the same stamp set, the Cool Treats. And I like the way it looks. So I'm going to take it and I'm going to stamp it over top of my transition to sort of hide that. So you won't even know that those two panels are sort of glued together. You can't really tell unless you're looking for it, but this little stamp really hides it well. So I'm stamping with my JennyCardDesigns Obsidian Amalgam ink. It's a nice crisp black ink, and I want to get that stamped all the way across my panel. And I did have a few shallow spots of ink, so I grabbed a fine liner permanent marker and I just sort of colored over top of any of the shallow spots on my little stamp, and that was perfect. I love the way this looks. So I'm going to take the sentiments from the Cool Treats stamp set, and it says "Stay Cool." Perfect with my popsicle ice cream background. I've got a piece of black cardstock, and I'm going to put that into my mini Misti, and I'm going to treat it with my anti-static powder bag. Now I've just dumped a whole lot over it, probably more than I need, but I'd rather have extra than not enough. So I'm just going to take this little brush that I have and sweep away any of my excess embossing magic bag stuff. And I'm going to ink up my greeting that says "Stay Cool" with JennyCardDesigns watermark ink. So I'll get that stamped. Make sure I get good even coverage over my sentiment. I've got some white embossing powder from Brutus Monroe, and it's the Alabaster embossing powder. This is my favorite fine detail white embossing powder. I love the way that this stuff embosses. It's super bright white and super fine detailed. So I will tap off any of the excess and heat set this greeting until it is smooth and melted. And then I'll clean up my mess, and I'm going to take this over to my trimmer. I'm going to trim down the greeting just so that it's a little square strip. And then I'm also going to use my leftover scraps. Instead of using foam squares here to pop up my sentiment, I'm just going to use those leftover strips of black cardstock And then I don't have to worry about wasting those pieces or having to buy more foam squares. So I really like this little trick. Something I learned from Jennifer McGuire, and it's really stuck with me. I feel really good about not wasting cardstock. So I get that all adhered together, and I'm going to place this right smack in the center of my card. And I really love the way this looks. I love that graphic sort of line stamp for the transition between cardstock so that you don't see it. And it gives us a nice place to set my sentiment down. So that's it for this card. Super fun and summery and bright and colorful. I love it so much. Well, that's it for today's video. Thanks so much for stopping by to spend some of your time with me here today. I appreciate you being here. Coming up on screen are a couple of videos that I think you may enjoy. And have yourself a lovely day, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!